Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So we're continuing on with our discussion of Pancharatra Agamas from the book Agamas in South Indian Vaishnavism by V. Varadachari, Dr. V. Varadachari of the Indological Institute in Pondicherry, French Indological Institute. So we left off, we were talking about different aspects of Agamas, jnana and yoga, and in the discussion of yoga we were discussing different parts of yoga, pranayama, and now we come to the section on pratyahara. So if anybody who's studied Patanjali yoga or Astanga yoga, which has 8 limbs, right? Pratyahara is a limb of the Astanga yoga system. So pratyahara, the next limb, is the withdrawing of the mind from the objects of the senses and placing it in the Lord. Fixing the mind in the Lord is called dharana. This is also a limb of the Astanga yoga system. Dhyana consists of contemplating upon the Lord. After dharana comes dhyana. Dharana means to carry, and dhyana means to deeply contemplate or meditate. So dharana is the first stage, then dhyana, meditation. It consists in contemplating upon the Lord with the marvelous form in the midst of the dazzling flame of fire within the akasha, or the airspace or the space of the heart, in the heart. Because in the Upanishads it's described that the Lord is there within the lotus of the heart. The human heart is like an inverted lotus bud, like a lotus which is all closed up, turned upside down. Looks just like a human heart. So that's the imagery of the heart given in the Upanishads. Of course, it's a poetic image, and we understand that the Lord is there within the mind, within the consciousness of the living being. So samadhi is the last stage after dhyana. Dharana, dhyana, and then samadhi. Pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The last stage brings about the appearance of the Lord. The appearance of the Lord. So I'm guessing as Paramatman within the heart. These limbs, when practiced, arouse the Kundalini Shakti. Shakti means power, and Kundalini is a type of power that's within the body, which is conceived of as like a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. And when it's woken up, it travels up the spine. So, and makes it ascend step by step through the chakras and merge in the absolute self at the point called Dvarashanta. So Dvarasha means 12, Anta means end. Not exactly sure what that means. At this stage, there is a union of Shakti with God. The power is united with the Paramatman. So, of course, as I said before, the jnana and yoga sections of Pancharatra are not studied that deeply these days. So because these are more theoretical or doctrinal aspects of Pancharatra, rather than the Kriya and the Charya sections of Pancharatra, which have to do with the actual physical activities of worshipping of the deity and building temples and installing deities and worshipping them on a daily and occasional basis. So, next, we talk about nyasa. Nyasa means to place, but it means to surrender. And we find the nyasa vidya in the Upanishads also. So it is an Upanishadic vidya, one of the 32 Upanishadic vidyas. Nyasa is enjoined as a means of obtaining final release, or moksha, on the main ground that with the passage of time, here nyasa means prapatti or sharanagati or surrender, placing oneself at the feet of the Lord. With the passage of time, the embodied self is adversely affected so as to lose knowledge, stamina, strength, and longevity, and is afflicted by the results of the deeds done frequently. So the self is asked to avoid the two extremes of doing good deeds like the Agnistoma sacrifice and bad deeds like killing animals, the results of which are bound to affect the doer through the karma process. The reactions to those punyas and papas, those good deeds and bad deeds, will certainly affect the individual who's bound in this material world, because he will have to continue his transmigration of bodies in this material world, the cycle of samsara, again and again, to work out these karmas or these reactions to these good and bad activities, both punyas and papas. The self must seek the Lord as its refuge by the process of nyasa or sharanagati or surrender. And it will surely reach him at the end of its life's journey. This is called by several names such as prapati, prapadana, sharanagati, bharanyasa, and so on. So we've heard all these terms before. They're synonyms for surrender. The supreme place, that is moksha, the Parampada, the supreme heaven of Lord Vishnu, right, which a self-seeking release could not get to by such means, such as jnana yoga or bhakti, is obtained by this itself. So this process of surrender is easier to attain than the paths of effort, which are jnana yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga. It has 6 components, and these 6 components are actually defined in the Lakshmi Tantra, which is a Pancharatra Agama. It has 6 components, namely the resolution on the part of the self, the individual self, to do such acts only as would be in conformity with the divine will of God. Number 2, giving up those acts that would displease God. So the positive doing of what pleases God, and the negative giving up what doesn't please him. In other words, following his orders in the scriptures. Number 3, the firm conviction that God will protect those who seek his protection. Number 4, the choice of God as the protector, as the only protector. And number 5, placing one's own self in his charge. And number 6, the realization of the helplessness of the self to seek any other course. And these can happen in different orders, or normally it's the hopelessness and the helplessness and hopelessness of performing these other paths of effort that lead the soul, the individual soul, to this process of nyasa or prapati or sharanagati, surrender to God as the only means. Among these, the 5th element must be considered as the act of self-surrender, the others forming its elements, or all the 6 may form parts of the act. Nyasa, or surrender, right, is not a physical act, but only a mental process. It takes the shape of a prayer in the form of, I am a receptacle of sins, I have nothing, and have no way to pursue. Please become yourself the means. So when we pray to God, please, God to please become the means. Being a form of knowledge, this thought also becomes a means of moksha, as enjoined in the Vedic passage, Nanya Panta Ayanaya. Is it Shrayanaya? Shrayanaya Vidyate. Let me have a look at that. See, it's difficult.
I think it's Ayanaya.
I think it's Ayanaya. Yeah, Ayanaya. It's Ayanaya. I'm just looking at the actual book, the hard copy. So by adopting this means of self-surrender, it is said that all that are expected to be performed, such as penances, sacrifices, giving of alms and gifts, are taken to have been done, been finished, and moksha or liberation is assured. It is further held that nyasa is superior to all other methods enjoined for obtaining moksha. So nyasa, again, which means surrender to the Lord, is given the symbolic representation of sacrifice. The self is the oblation. The soul is the individual soul is the oblation to be offered into the fire of sacrifice, offered with the utterance of the word namaha. Just like when we do archana, we offer the different names of the Lord, and we offer a flower or a kumkum or something like that. We offer tulsi leaf at the feet of the Lord with the word namaha. Namaha meaning not me, but you, like that. So it's all about accepting the Lord as the upaya, as the means. One who takes up this means is held to have performed 100 sacrifices. that it is a powerful weapon to be used to fight against worldly sufferings and gain the state of final release is explained by the declaration that even those who are devoted to the performance of good deeds, who are learned, and who are adepts in yogic methods do not bear any comparison to one who has taken up nyasa or surrender, not being equal to even a billionth fraction of him. So it's considered a very, very powerful means. Self-surrender does not consist in placing merely oneself under God. All the possessions are also to be surrendered to him. Nyasa is to be done once only once. The evil consequence of getting rebirth will happen to one who takes to other courses like karma or bhakti, leaving nyasa imperfectly done. Those who adopt this means must not violate the Vedic law even in thought. Any lapse, however, could be expiated by the act itself. And of course, there's some slightly different understandings of this in the two Vadagalai and Tengalai sects of the Sri Vaishnavas. The Vadagalai say that if there's a lapse or if there's some sin done after surrender to the Lord, that one should do another surrender, which is called, but it's not called as property or surrender. It's called a prayaschitta property. It's an atonement property. The Tengalai sect, however, says that no further property is to be done on any account, not even for prayaschitta, not even for atonement, but the simple remembrance of the one time that one did the property, right, is enough to alleviate any further sin, any reaction to any further sin that one may have been committed either knowingly or unknowingly. Nyasa is the foremost amongst the means for crossing the sea of worldly existence. It is the only way by both the ignorant and learned, and the learned can adopt, which both the ignorant and the learned can adopt. Those who adopt this course enjoy the rewards of their good deeds and get freedom from all kinds of bondage and acquire the highest status. Those who take to the methods of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, right, and yoga, other types of yoga, are required to acquire certain specific qualifications which are different according to the distinctions based on birth and gender, sex, and mental abilities. Further, there is no certainty that the rewards are sure to be bestowed upon them who adopt those means. Some will have to take more births to receive the fruits of these undertakings. Hence, these are considered to be hard to practice. From this point of view, nyasa is certainly easier to take up because there are no restrictions based on the grounds of gender, sex, birth, learning, or any kind of attainment. However, it is declared that, though easy, it is hard to practice. So here's a quotation from the Lakshmi Tantra. Upayaha sukaraha soyam duskarascha mato mama. Lakshmi Tantra 17.105b. The significance of this seems to lie in the fact that nyasa is adopted only once in one's lifetime. And so the aspirant must become conscious of his getting fully qualified by acquiring all the 5 constituent parts of nyasa, such as atmanikshepa. And in adopting the other methods like karma and jnana, the aspirant has to qualify himself by having upanayana, or listening to the teachings from a preceptor or practicing the angas of yoga. However, in doing so, he is likely to commit errors which will land him into difficulties such as simple results, non-level of ignorance, or the rise of doubtful cognitions and the inability to control mental activities. On the other hand, the result is certain from nyasa, or from surrender. But great care has to be exercised to acquire and realize one's fitness for it. Probably this is the significance attached to the statement. In this context, it is interesting to note that bhakti is not mentioned as an independent means of moksha, while the Astanga Yoga, which gets a detailed treatment, could be taken to represent bhakti. Though the word bhakti is not used in such a connection, the concept of bhakti and the activities of the bhakta get frequent references. In fact, worship of the deity is incompatible with the absence of bhakti. To a large extent, bhakti, or devotion, alone dominates the spirit of the relationship between man and God, as evidenced in many a passage in the Agama texts. The doctrine of nyasa, or surrender, is not found developed or treated in many well-known texts other than the Arhibudnya Samhita, the Lakshmi Tantra, Sri Prashna Samhita, and a few other Samhitas. The general conclusion is to be drawn in favor of the Bhakti Marga, which is also known as Upasana, or worship, and comprises of 8-limbed yoga, which we just talked about, according to the other texts. The dissolution of creation is of 7 kinds, namely nitya, the natural and final destruction, naimitika, that relating to the visible universe occurring from time to time, prakriti, that of all the categories which evolve from matter, prasuti, relating to the dissolution of avyakta in the prasuti kosha, or sheath, maya, dissolution of matter of the prasuti kosha, in the maya kosha, or the maya sheath, shakti, or power, the dissolution of matter in the maya kosh into the shakti kosh, and antyantiki, escape of the self who performs yoga from the shakti kosh into shakti itself. The self does not get annihilated there, but has independent existence in the transcendental form as part of the ultimate reality. Okay, so that's a very technical view of the dissolution, different dissolutions. So, linguistic occultism plays a part in the Pancharatra doctrines, forming a strong background for the worship of the deity. Brahman is the source of all sound. When it feels the urge to create, there arises a state of activity combined with inactivity, santata, when the sound and its meaning get distinguished, but yet remaining latent, and objects get indicated by the sounds which denote them. Sound should therefore precede the rise of the objects, or the objects could be held to rise from sound. So if you read other books on Indian philosophy, you'll find that there's a school of thought called Spota, where they talk about creation coming from sound. So at this stage, sound is known as nada, which gives rise to the next stage, bindu, also known as pashyanti. This then leads to the madhyama stage, the middle stage, when the logical relation between the word and its meaning lies in the form of an impression. Vaikari is the next stage, when the syllables and words are distinctly noticeable. In the evolution of sounds produced, the units of the alphabet are classified variously. For instance, Ushman, Antasta, Swara, and Sparsha. Sparsha are the stops, from Kaka Gaga to Papa Baba Ma, the 25 stops. Ushmana is the sibilants, the S sounds, 3 S sounds. Antasta is that which stands apart, which is the semivowels, and Swara are the vowels. So represent the 4 kinds, and so-called chatuspadi, four parts of the alphabet. So the mantras are formed out of these, and they flow from Brahman. In accordance with the mental realization of the aspirants, particular mantras are evolved. That sound which an aspirant receives with the faith that it would protect him, which shields him from fear with its purport concealed, in which the deity's nature is manifest in the sequence in which the syllables occur, and which reveals pure knowledge, is called a mantra. It's called mantra. So that's a very technical definition of mantra. And it's given here from Lakshmi Tantra 18:44-45. Since sound originates from Brahman, God is said to present himself in the form of mantra. Particularly, mantras are useful in internal worship, antaryaga, or mental worship. Japa, or repetition of a mantra, and dhyana, meditation on the meaning of the mantra, do thus become meaningful. When the mantras are uttered, as in nyasa and homa, so when we do the mantra nyasa, when we touch different parts of the body and we say different syllables of the mantra, or when we use the mantras in homa, offering into the sacred fire, they convey the intended meaning to the deity, and so it becomes clear that God is there to listen to the prayers of his devotees. Creation of articulate sounds is on the same plan as in the cosmic creation. The sound is at the root. I said akara Vishnu, akaro Vishnu. So the letter is related to Vishnu. So the sound is at the root, the first short A, the first letter of the alphabet. All other sounds being its transformations, each sound being an effect of the sound that precedes it. The first sound, that is audible, is the aspirate, ha, ha. And it is called visarga, or creation. So the word visarga actually means, sarga means creation, or visarga means subsequent creation. Right? So we have those two dots in Devanagari, or the H with the dot under it in transliteration. It's called visarga, it's a letter. And it also has to do with the aspirate because it's a breathing sound. The anuswara, or the pure nasal sound, like the N in the French bon, like that. The M with the dot, either above or below it in transliteration, or the bindu on top of a Devanagari, the dot above the top of the Devanagari letter. Anuswara represents the withdrawal of speech, or samhara. Samhara means destruction, the withdrawal of speech. The former is called the moon. The former is called the moon, and the latter is called the sun. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that. The short vowels are the sun's rays, and the long ones are those rays of the moon. The consonants represent matter and its evolutes. So in the Sankhya system, the different material elements as they come from Pradhana and Mula Prakriti. The antastas, or the semivowels, are said to keep God's manifestation in the vyuhas within themselves. Yara, la, va. So these are Yara, la, va. And we'll notice that when we do the nyasa with the Panchapanishad mantras, we use the ya, yam, ram, lam, bam, right? That go along with the names of the vyuhas, Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Buddha, right? So they're equated there. The semivowels, the antastas, are said to keep God's manifestation in the vyuhas within themselves. The Ushman sounds, the S's, sh, and sa, and ksha, which is a conjunct consonant with K and the cerebral S, represent the four vyuhas and Paravasudeva. So here he must be considering also that the aspirate H, pa, is also an Ushman, and so in all they have five, unless he's considering the vyuhas including Paravasudeva to be four, in which case it would just be the Ushmans plus Ksha. But it seems to be, he seems to be saying that these five, they form together Pancha Brahman. Yes, so he's talking about five. Paravasudeva is different from Vyuha Vasudeva, and then Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are the Ushman sounds, which are Sha, Shra, and Sa, plus Ha, right, the aspirate, plus Ksha, this conjunct, which together form Pancha Brahman. Okay, so there's a quote for that from one of the Samhitas. The structure of the sound is fitted into the inner yogic body of the aspirant. This body has 12 chakras, each having 12 groups of 4 sounds each. So you have 12 chakras, each having 12 groups of 4 sounds each. And it represents the microcosmic formation of the macrocosmos. So the meditation on the inner body, the chakras, the chakra system within the body, is a contemplation of that being the microcosm as the reflection of the macrocosm outside of the body, the universe. This is helpful in nyasa while performing Buddha Shuddhi, because Buddha Shuddhi is a purely mental process of purification where we meditate upon those different chakras and also upon the analogy of the universe and those chakras in the body. The inner worship becomes purposeful when the set of 4 sounds is uttered. Since this set has the 4 Vyuha deities presiding over it. That's why we do this, Panchapanishad mantras, when we do Buddha Shuddhi. It was described also, for those of you who are interested in the application of this, you can watch, there's a playlist on the YouTube channel about Ramanuja's Nitya Grantha, where Ramanuja describes this in the act of daily worship, Ija. The presence of these deities is easily visualized by the aspirant. A mantra is considered to be complete when it has 4 parts. Okay, so here are the 4 parts: Bija, Pinda, Sangya, and Pada. Each is powerful in itself. Among them, the Bija refers to the soul of the mantra, and the others to the body of the mantra. Mantras delight the aspirant in his journey through Padadvan. I'm not sure what that means. They create a sense of complete detachment in him by taking him through Tattva, Kata, and Varna. Finally, the aspirant enters into the eternal Brahman called Lakshmi Narayana. Because yoga means connecting our relationship with the Supreme Lord, Lakshmi Narayana, Sriman Narayana. Among the several mantras that are to be used are those of Sudarshana, the chakra weapon of the Lord, Lakshmi, and Narasimha are considered to be of supreme importance. Sudarshana, Lakshmi, and Narasimha. The novel process is found evolved and treated in this should be Jayaki Samhita, but it says Jayat Samhita. Maybe it's Jayat Samhita, I'm not sure. Regarding the course of Vipassana or worship. It is based on the concept of Vishakya Yupa. Vishaka Yupa. Yupa is a sacrificial yoke. And Vishaka is the name of a star. I'm not sure exactly what Vishaka Yupa means. It bears comparison with Madhu Vidya. Madhu Vidya is also one of the Upanishadic Vidyas in the Upanishads. Madhu meaning honey. And Vidya is a type of knowledge or a type of meditation on Brahman, according to which Brahman is to be meditated upon in the states of both cause and effect. Brahman is the cause and the sun is the effect. The aspirant must meditate upon Brahman in the state of effect, namely as the sun, and later in the state of cause in the form of the inner self of the Antaratman of the sun, meaning Surya Narayana. He who does so will become a Vasu in another eon, and again continuing the meditation on Vasu, he will reach Brahman at the end of his life. Both the sun and Brahman, who are to be meditated upon, are only Brahman. Similarly, the aspirant must meditate upon Aniruddha in Svetadweep. So he meditates upon Vasudev or Vasu, right, as Surya Narayana. He meditates as Aniruddha in Svetadweep in the Milky Ocean, the Milky Island, the white-colored island in the Milky Ocean, to which place he would go. And then to Pradyumna, he meditates on Pradyumna, to whom he must meditate, right? Then the meditation on Sankarsana, whom he reaches next, will take him to Vasudeva. So we have this Pancha Brahman being worked out here in meditation. This is stated in the Jayat Samhita to be another method prescribed for those who desire to enjoy the bliss of Brahman. This method is prescribed for those who follow the Panchakala Prakriya. Panchakala Prakriya means the 5 daily activities, breaking up the Vaishnava's day into five stages, which are Abhigamana, Upadana, Ija, Swadhyaya, and Yoga. The 4 deities control the waking. These are the 4 deities of the Chaturvyuha, Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. The waking, dream, deep sleep, and transcendental states, sometimes which are referred to as Vishva, Taijasa, Pragya, and Turiya. Turiya also means Brahman, is a name for Brahman, but it means also the fourth state. So it means here the transcendental state. The Lakshmi Tantra and some other Agamas speak of the 5th stage called Turiyatita, which is of the form of Lakshmi Narayana. This is the supravyuha state of existence, which manifests the infinite divinity and splendor of the soul when one comes in contact with Sriman Narayana. This is also called Shakshatkara. So this method of passing from one state to another is called Krama Mukti. Krama Mukti. So Krama means one step up, one step by step, Krama. Just like we have the Vedic recitation, Kramapat. Kramapat means saying a mantra step by step. So which finds also a different kind of representation. By worshipping the Vibhava form of God, what are the Vibhava forms? Remember, we have 5 forms of God mentioned in Pancharatra, the Para, Vyuha, Vibhava, Antaryaman, and Archa. So the Para and the Vyuha we've been talking about, Vasudeva, Para Vasudeva, and then the Chatur Vyuha, Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. And next, the expansions from them come at different times in this material world as avatars. The avatars, Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, like this. These are called Vibhava forms of God. The aspirant gets to the viewer stage. By worshipping the Vibhava forms of God, the aspirant gets to the viewer stage, gets back to the viewer stage. After worshipping him in that stage, he reaches the subtle form of Parabrahman called Vasudeva. Back to the Vasudeva stage, the subtle form. From this, it is evident that the aspirant cannot get moksha at the end of the life in which he meditates on a particular form of God. As in the case of Bhakti Yoga, one is required to take a series of births. That stage shows that the aspirant will have to start at the waking state and pass through the dream state by fully getting qualified for it, and so from one state to the next. This is justly brought out by Parasara Bhatta in his Sri Rangaraja Stava, which is a prayer stotra by Parasara Bhatta, the son, one of the sons of Puresha, on Rangaraja, Lord Ranganatha and Sri Rangam, like that. So he's also explained that. So now we come to the next chapter. The next chapter is chapter 7. And this, so we wrapped that up about Pancharatric doctrines, and now we're going to be talking about the different texts of the Pancharatra. So Pancharatric texts. The Pancharatra doctrines were preached by 5 teachers: Shandilya, Opagayana, Monjayana, Kaushika, and Bharadwaja. The works, so remember when we were discussing about the Vaishnavism Agamas, we talked about the different munis and different rishis who taught the Vaishnavism Agamas. Here are the sages who have taught the Pancharatra Agamas. So actually, I talked to Raman Bhatta one time, and he said, if somebody is coming in one of the gotras of one of these sages, Shandilya, Upagayana, Monjayana, Kaushika, Bharadwaja, then he doesn't have to, you could say that he's already a Pancharatran practically, because he's coming in the lineage, he's coming in that gotra. Of course, still to become a Pancharatran, one should take the Panchasamskara initiation. The works of the first and the last, that is Shandilya and Bharadwaja, right? Among these are available, while that of the second Upagayana, right, gets only reference in some works. So they're actually lost and just referred to in other works. The other two left no works. So we don't have the works of Monjayana and Kaushika. The works of the two writers mentioned above have more than one text with the same name. So the two writers he's talking about are Shandilya and Bharadvaja. They treat matters like the worship of God, bhakti, and prapati. So upasana, bhakti, and prapati. These are the subject matters which are treated in their texts. The Narayaniya section of the Mahabharata throws light on the traditions of the Pancharatra Agama. So we know that the Pancharatra Agama is ancient because it's mentioned in the Itihasa Mahabharata. So the Vyuha doctrine and the daily round of life classified under 5 heads are the matters treated there. Right, so again, we're talking about the Panchakala Kriya, that the 5 different sections of the Vaishnava stay. The earliest texts, as well as the Vyuha doctrines, Chata Vyuha, the earliest texts must be expected to have dealt with these matters only. On this ground, the texts of the two writers, that is Shandilya and Bharadvaja, mentioned above, could not have been very early. The interlocutors here are, so in those texts that are written by Shandilya and Bharadvaja, there will be different sages that are quoted speaking. Just like when we read the Bhagavatam or read the Bhagavad Gita, it's Vedavyasa who's writing, who's the author of the whole text. But within the text, there's stories within the text, and there's different rishis or different sages talking, or seers talking to each other. So here are the names of some of the sages who are quoted in those texts by Shandilya and Bharadvaja as interlocutors. Aniruddha, Sankarshana, Bhagavan, Vasudeva, Sri, Brigu, Ahibudnya is the name of Shiva, I believe, Narada, Markandeya, Shandilya, and others. Some of them are said to have received instruction from others mentioned above, and in their turn, they offered expositions to others. It is not therefore possible to fix the priority of any of these texts over the others. So in the number of Pancharatra texts is listed in some of these works themselves. So first of all, that first whole paragraph is explaining about the Pancharatra text, because it was giving an overview of all of them, who wrote them, and who is mentioned in them as speaking different truths. So now we're going to hear about some of the actual texts themselves, how many there are, and a little bit about them. So the number of Pancharatra texts is listed in some of these works themselves. They are 154 according to the Vishnu Tantra, 108 in the Padma and the Vishwamitra Samhitas, 106 in the Purushottama Samhita, 103 in the Bharadvaja Samhita, 100 in the Kapinjala Samhita, 91 in the Markandeya Samhita, 25 in the Hayashirsha Samhita, which is also sometimes called Hayashirsha Pancharatra, and which is quoted in Haribhakti Vilas quite a lot, and in the Maheshwara Tantra, so 25 in the Maheshwara Tantra also. Maheshwara Tantra doesn't mean it's about Shiva, but it means it is about the great Lord, or it may have been spoken by Shiva. And also in the Agni Purana. So Agni Purana here is considered a text of the Pancharatra Agama, and it mentions 25 other texts. In a sense, Agni Purana, because it talks about the Pancharatras, it can also be considered as part of that. Schrader, who is the German scholar, Indologist, who was living in Adyar in Madras in Chennai during the First World War, I believe, he was interned because, of course, England was ruling over India at the time, and there was a fight between the First and Second World Wars were fights between England and Germany. So the Germans were all interred. So this German scholar, Otto von Schrader, who wrote the very seminal book, which is a basic text on Pancharatra called Pancharatra, Introduction to Pancharatra and the Ahibudnya Samhita, which everybody should read if they want to know a little bit about Pancharatra. His list contains 210 and 14 more of the texts. So he has actually got 224 listed different Pancharatra Agamas, but the titles of them are not noted. So he says that there are 224. The introduction, so it's just like the Upanishads, there are a list of 108 basically, and then there are other ones which are added on here and there. So there's no real fixed number, but there's a lot of Pancharatra Agamas. The introduction to the Lakshmi Tantra, or Lakshmi Samhita, or Lakshmi Tantra, enumerates 225 works, of which 56 end their names in Tantra, 2 in Tilaka, 1 in Vaibhava, 1 in Rahasya, 1 in Sambhava, and the remaining are ending in Samhita. The panorama of Pancharatra literature mentions 289 works. So this is the highest number that we have so far, 289 works, of which 45 end their name in Tantra, 3 in Saga. Saga means ocean, right? Rahasya, which was mentioned above, means secret. All these are different names, right? But they're all just names of Agamas, Pancharatra Agamas. 1 in Vijnana, 1 in Purana, 1 in Tilaka, 1 in Siddhanta, 1 in Udravana, and the remaining 236 in Samhita. This work describes 104 works, among which 99 end their names in Samhita, 3 in Tantra, 1 in Samutraya, and 1 in Chudamani. It is presumed that the remaining 186 works are partially lost. 12 among them have more than one text with the same name. The following groups contain redundant names. So here's some groups, different groups. Number 1, Garuda Samhita, Tarksha Samhita, Vainatya Samhita, and Khadgesha Samhita. So you understand, Garuda, Tarksha, Vainatya, and Khadgesha are all names of Garuda. Then we have number 2, Nrsimhakya Tantra and Nrikeshari Samhita. So Nrikeshari is the name of Narasimha. Narasimha is also a name of Narasimha. So these are considered redundant names. Whether the texts are exactly the same or not is not clear, but at least the names seem redundant because they have this name of the same deity or the same personality spoken. Number 3, Atri Samhita, Atreya Samhita, Aindra Tantra, Kama Tantra, Dhruva Tantra, Paniniya Mahatantra, Pavaka Samhita, Pushkala Samhita, Bodhayana Tantra, Mahi Tantra, Maya Tantra, Varaha Purana Samhita, Varaha Mira Samhita, Vaibhava Tantra, Sakala Samhita, Sakatayana Samhita, Shaiva Samhita, Samohana Tantra, Sankhya Tantra, Surya Tantra, Soma Tantra, and many others are purely names connected with certain persons and sages who have distinguished themselves in fields associated with them in order to give them a status in the list. So until information is available about many of these works, it's not possible to decide their exact nature. Besides, so we just have, in many cases, we just have the titles of these books mentioned in other books. We don't actually have the books themselves. So we can't really evaluate these texts. Not all of them anyway. So besides, among these works, 97 are mentioned only once in the 12 lists, 45 twice, and 45 3 times. The Pancharatra texts are classified under three headings. Okay, so there's 3 divisions of Pancharatra texts. Divya, which means divine, Muni Bhashita, which are spoken by munis or rishis, and Manusha, which are spoken by human beings. Right? The distinction between munis and human beings, not exactly sure. We have to look that up. The Sadhbada, Poshkara, and Jayaki, right, which are considered the 3 gems of the Pancharatra, right, Samhitas, and others are treated as Divya, divine. So that's the highest grade of Pancharatra Samhita, as they contain the exposition of the doctrines by Narayana himself. So when we say that a Pancharatra Samhita is Divya, such as these 3, the Sadhbada, Poshkara, and Jayaki, very important texts, right? In that text, Lord Sriman Narayana himself is giving the doctrines. Those which are the expositions of Brahma and eminent sages, so Devatas, or Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, eminent sages, as of the second kind, which is called Muni Bhashita. So, for an example of these is Ishvara, Parameshvara, and Bharadvaja, and others. The works written by mortals come under the last heading. The Agamas are also classified as Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika. So that may be interesting, So what is it? Rajasic or Tamasic Pancharatra Agama? That's very interesting. So the Ishvara Bharadvaja, Somantavya, Parameshvara, Vaihayasa, Chitra Shikandi, and some other Samhitas come under the first heading, that is Sattvika. To the Rajasa kind belong the Sanat Kumar Samhita, the Padmobhava Samhita, Shatatapa, Tejo Dravina, Maya Vaibhavika, and others. So these are Rajasic. The Pancha Prashna, Shuka Prashna, Tattvasagra, and others are of the Tamasic kind. Okay, so he doesn't explain exactly what that means. Generally, an Agama text should contain 4 divisions. And we've discussed this before: Jnana, Yoga, Kriya, and Charya. Among the texts of the Pancharatra Agama, Padma Samhita contains these divisions. Others generally deal with some of these, but maybe not all of these. So this is another reason why Padma Samhita is so often studied, because it gives a broad range of everything, of all the topics that are discussed in Pancharatra. Whereas other Samhitas may specialize in certain topics, and they may leave out some other topics. Among the so others generally deal with some of these. The Brihad Brahma Samhita has 4 padas, or 4 sections, whose exact nature is not stated. The Shandilya Samhita has one division called Bhakti Kanda, first part, and another called fourth part. The Sanat Kumar Samhita has 4 divisions named Ratras, or nights, named Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and Rishi. It has lost a division called Brihaspatir Ratra. So it originally had 5 divisions, 5 Ratras, or 5 sections. Similarly, there are 5 divisions called Ratra enumerated in the first, second, and others in the Jnanamitasara Samhita. Now, the Jnanamitasara Samhita is also sometimes called the Narada Pancharatra. Right, so there are two Samhitas which are called Narada Pancharatra. One is called Jnanamitasara Samhita, and the other is the Bharadvaja Samhita. The Hayashirsha Samhita, or Hayashirsha Pancharatra, has 4 khandas, 4 sections: Adi, Sankarshana, Linga, and Shaura. Among the texts, the Poshkara, Jayaki, and Sadhbada Samhitas are said to be the best. In brackets here, Ratna. Ratna means the jewels. They're the gems of the Pancharatra. These are the most important ones. And they are used in the worship of the 3 main temples that follow Pancharatra in Sri Vaishnavism. Right? The Poshkara Samhita in Srirangam, the Jayaki Samhita in Kanchipuram, and the Sadhbada Samhita in Melkote. I think I've got that right. So on them are based the Parameshvara, Padma, and Ishvara Samhitas. So the Parameshvara, Padma, and Ishvara Samhitas are considered to be like commentaries on the Poshkara, Jayakya, and Sadhbada Samhitas. The Parameshvara Samhita is a commentary on the Poshkara Samhita. The Padma Samhita is a commentary on the Jayakya Samhita, and the Ishvara Samhita is a commentary on the Sadhbada Samhita. Right. So Padma Samhita, though, is the one which is generally studied by people who are not associated with any of these 3 temples. But if you are associated with these 3 temples of Srirangam, Kanchipuram, Devaraj Perumal, and Tirunarayana and Melkote, then you study those particular Samhitas and their commentary Samhitas. According to the Padma Samhita, there are the 5 best Ratna texts: Padma, Sanat Kumara, Parama, Padmodbhava, and Mahendra Samhitas. The Kanva Samhita mentions them to be 6 in number, with the addition of the Kanva Samhita. So the Kanva Samhita also says that the Padma Samhita says there are 5, the 5 which are the best. But the Kanva Samhita says there are 6 and adds itself as one of them. And The Sanat Kumar Samhita, however, is here mentioned as the foremost amongst the Samhitas. So that's also considered a very important Samhita, Sanat Kumar Samhita. The Agamas might have originated in North India. That's interesting because most people will think the Agamas originated in South India. But here he's saying the Agamas might have originated in North India, but the texts were developed in South India itself. These texts contain references to the kings of Chera, Chola, and Pandya regions. So the Pandya kingdom was centered in Madurai, which is south of Srirangam. The Chola kingdom was headquarters was in Tanjore, which is to the east of Srirangam. The Chera is usually considered to be a kingdom of Kerala, so it's to the southwest of Srirangam. The Adhyayana Utsava means a festival, and Adhyayana means the singing of the 4,000 Nalaya Divya Prabandham in Tamil of the Alwars, singing of Gauda's compositions. What are Gauda or Andal? Her compositions were two, Tirupalai and Natya Tirumoni. They're also part of this Nalaya Divya Prabandham, 4,000 holy songs in Tamil by the Alwars. Floating festivals, which is called in Sanskrit as Tepotsavam, where you have a floating temple which floats around the temple tank with the Utsava deity on it at night, usually at night. Singing of God and the Alwars, right? And the Alwars find reference in these texts. So we have these Agama texts, which were developed, may have been originated in North India, but they were developed in South India in the Tamil Nadu, Kerala area. And they mention Adhyayana Utsava, which is the festival of Vaikuntha Ekadasi for 21 days when the 4,000 songs of the Alwars in Tamil are spoken about. Just as the Bhagavatam talks about great devotees of the Lord taking birth in Kali Yuga in Tamil country and drinking the water of the Kaveri and the Tamraparni and living on the banks of these holy rivers in South India. So there's actually a reference to certain places in South India in these texts. So here, there's also references to this Adhyayana Utsava, the singing of Gauda or Andal's compositions, which are part of Adhyayana Utsava. Float festivals are mentioned, and the Alwars are mentioned in the Pancharatra Agamas. They find reference in these texts. There are even Tamil expressions used in some of these Sanskrit texts, the Pancharatra Agama. So that proves that they were developed in the Tamil country, right? Even though they may have originated in North India. Since these works contain references to Nathamuni, Yamuna, Vedanta Deshika, and the Alwars, these must have been composed later than their times. So there might be some interpolations in some of these texts where they mention later acharyas like Vedanta Deshika or even Nathamuni, Yamunacharya, and the Alwars. The period of the Agamas must therefore be between 800 AD and 1400 AD. However, Utpala, 850 AD, Yamuna, 10th century, and Ramanuja, 1017 to 1137, cite passages from the Pancharatra texts. So, because we know that Utpala, he cites the Pancharatra texts, Yamuna in the 10th century and Ramanuja in the 11th century, they all cite some passages from some Pancharatra texts, so we know that there were some Pancharatra texts that were extant before that time. Therefore, most important Samhitas like Poshkara, Jayaki, and Sadhbada, the Ishvara, Parama, Samat, Kumara, and Arhibudnya, and others, have been composed before 800 AD. That's for sure. The Vaikhanasa texts have a uniform treatment of the subject matter with slight differences among them. In this, they differ from the Pancharatra works, where there is much more difference between one text and the other, right, in the Pancharatra works, whereas the Vaikhanasa works are much more homogeneous. Some texts deal with theories of cosmology, leaving aside temple worship. So there might be some Samhitas in the Pancharatra Agama which don't even touch much of the Kriya or Charya sections of actual installation of deities or temple worship. They just talk about cosmology in the yoga section or the Jnana section, and they just talk about mystic Kundalini yoga in the yoga section. While others concentrate on temple construction and worship of images or deities. Some describe the principles of yoga in detail, as I said, the Kundalini yoga, while others devote chapters to means of expiation, So there's lots of Pancharatra Agamas which have to talk about different forms of atonement or prayaschitta. The date of the composition of a particular text and its priority over another cannot be decided on the strength of the contents alone. That's very important. For instance, the Ahibhudnya, Jayaki, and Parama Samhitas and the Lakshmi Tantra give greater importance to cosmological theories, yantras, which are two-dimensional deities, and other matters. The Sanat Kumar Samhita deals with mantras, mudras, installation of idols or deities, expiatory rites or prayaschitta, right, atonement, and other such subjects, and contains no reference to temple construction or worship of deities. The Poshkara, Parameshwara, Sadhbada, Ishvara, Padma, Kapinjala, Vishvaksena, and Sri Prashna and other texts are more concerned with temple worship. It is hard to decide which matter is treated earlier than others, although it will not be wrong to assume the reference to temples point to a later date. Right, so obviously there was a doctrinal, text probably came first, and then the practical external worship of the deity came later. The Poshkara Samhita seems to be the earliest, and the Sadhbada Samhita, which refers to it, must be placed next to it. So Poshkara and Sadhbada are very early. The Jayaki comes next. So this is why these are important, because they are very ancient Samhitas, and they're considered the Ratnas or the gems. Followed by the Ahibhudnya Samhita and the Lakshmi Tantra, both of which mention the Sadhbada Samhita, right? So by internal textual examination, when we see that one Samhita mentions another one, it means that that other one came before it. The Ishvara Samhita must be placed next. Though it mentions the Poshkara, Jaya, and Sadhbada, Jaya meaning Jayaki and Sadhbada Samhita, and also the Parameshwara, Padma, and Ishvara, which may be a case of interpolation. So he's saying that the Ishvara Samhita is supposedly next in chronology, and it supposedly mentions the Poshkara, Jayaki, Sadhbada, and also the Parameshwara, Padma, and Ishvara, but this may be an interpolation. The Parama, Sanat Kumara, Parameshwara, Vishvaksena, and Padma are placed next in order. The criterion lies in that the texts mentioned earlier are cited in the one following them. Yet, this is not to be taken to help in deciding the priority, as such references to other texts could have been later additions or interpolations. Besides, there are passages in common between some of them, such as, number one, the Sadhbada, the Ishvara, and the Sri Prashna, and number two, the Sadhbada, Jayaki, and Lakshmi Tantra. This order can be admitted only tentatively, for the Padmodbhava and Kanva Samhitas are not available except in fragments. The Mahendra Samhita is also not available, but passages from it are cited in the Sanat Kumar Samhita, Parameshwara Samhita, and Padma Samhita. The Poshkara Samhita has a little less than 6,000 stanzas in 43 chapters. The text is incomplete, and some chapters break off in the middle. The Lord, with the name Bhagavan, addresses Brahma as Poshkara. The text mentions the Parameshwara, which it is based on. That is, the Poshkara is based on the Parameshwara, which is based on it. The Parameshwara being the commentary to the Poshkara, right? And also the Sadhbada, perhaps included later in the text. The original text must have been composed in North India. Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Pravaha, Sama, Bhaktraka, Amarvati, Gaja, Stita, Vitasa, Narmada, Vishadvati, Paroshni, Sindhu are rivers that are mentioned, and these are all rivers in North India. Yamuna is said to flow in southeast, Saraswati in the south, and Vitashta in the east. Airavati is identified with Ravi, and Vitasta with Jhelum. Vishdvati joins the Saraswati. Paroshni with the Ravi is identical with Airavati and is only represented here. Except Narmada, all the above mentioned rivers flow in North India and Northwest India, right? So the Narmada River is in Andhra Pradesh, sort of in the middle of India, like that. But all these other ones are much more north than that, more north and northwest. The place where the Samhita would have been composed should be somewhere in the northwest Punjab, near, perhaps near the Himalayas. In order to delight those who have faith in them, and to declare and establish certain places as holy, it is stated that Vasudeva and other deities came down and stay within the stones, evidently idols or deities which are installed and consecrated. The shrine of Sri Rangam, this is a quotation, I'm not sure exactly where from. It says 3624, but it doesn't say exactly where from. The shrine at Sri Rangam is glorified and is said to have been consecrated by Vibhishana according to the Pancharatra mode. The doors, windows, prakaras, means the different walls around the temple, are all stated to have some deities presiding over them. Tondaradipodi Alwar and Tirumangai Alwar, who flourished between 750 and 850 AD, are stated to have built this temple. Since this construction is in strict conformity with the rules laid down here and in the Parameshvara Samhita, right? Because it's based on, the worship is based on the Poshkara Samhita, and the Parameshvara Samhita is the commentary on the Poshkara Samhita. So Parameshvara Samhita is very important in the worship of Sri Rangam. Both these texts should have attained the present form long before 700 AD, and the Poshkara still earlier, as it forms the basis of the Parameshvara Samhita, right? Several shrines are also mentioned, such as Satyavrata, which means Kanchi, Vikata, Tirumalai, Tirupati, right? Actually, Tirumala up on the hill, right? Which is actually like the Nasa temple, and Simachala, which is even further north in that mountain range, Simachalam, or not in that mountain range, but up further on the coast, Simachalam, which is the Jira Narasimha temple, and others. The god is said to have a mantra deha. So here we're entering sort of a different topic. So I think we'll just leave it there because we're going to be talking about actual aspects. We've been giving a list of all the different Pancharatra Samhitas and to what extent they came before each other, and to what extent they mentioned each other, and we're dating them and placing them in North India or in South India because of their contents. And now we're going to start beginning to talk about the actual contents of these Samhitas. So I think that's probably a good place to stop here.